Welcome to the Champions of Active Women podcast. In each episode, we share stories and experiences of active female role models and individuals who support the active pursuits of girls and women. Our goal is to encourage and inspire girls and women to be active for a lifetime, to reach their goals, and to break new barriers in sport and life. This podcast is brought to you by the Active Women's Health Initiative in the Sports Medicine Research Institute at the University of Kentucky. The mission of the Active Women's Health Initiative is to optimize health and promote physical activity and wellness for girls and women across the lifespan. If you enjoy this podcast, you can make a donation to the Active Women's Health Initiative at uky.networkforgood.com. Your contribution helps us empower all girls and women to find their inner athlete and become athletes for life. It is my pleasure to introduce today's guest, Dr. Cady Brown. Dr. Brown is a native Lexingtonian who has been in private practice primary care for the past 3 years. She earned her undergraduate degree in East Asian history from Davidson College, where she was a varsity soccer athlete. During a study abroad trip to China, Dr. Brown studied traditional Chinese medicine that led her to apply to medical school at the University of Kentucky. She then completed an internal medicine residency at Tulane University. In her leisure time, Dr. Brown loves to be outside. You can find her running downtown, at the local parks with her children, Nettie and Chet, or on weekend adventures that might include creek walking or ice skating. Her professional work at Downtown Drs allows her to create strong relationships with patients and focus on the root of health issues. Her goal is to help patients with their health and wellness so they may pursue whatever it is they most enjoy. Welcome, Dr. Brown.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
So I shared a little bit about you and your career and in your bio, but I was hoping that you could get us started by talking about your medical practice and how you found yourself in this career.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I did not know I wanted to be a doctor when I was growing up. Of course, hindsight's 2020, and I can look back on my interests and things that I loved, and it makes sense. But I actually studied history. I was so interested in people and our past that I studied history. But I was at a school at Davidson College where you were encouraged to take a variety of different classes. So I also took some science classes and writing classes and other things. And I studied abroad in China because my focus in history was modern, really Chinese history or East Asian history. And so when I went there to study abroad, the program that I chose had a piece to it that looked at traditional Chinese medicine. And I kind of thought maybe the learning about the community around that, or the kind of the big picture and how that interwove with the community would be most interesting to me. And it turns out while I was there, I thought, oh no, look at these practitioners. They get this really special, intimate relationship with people. They get to help them understand more about their bodies and how to heal them and make them as healthy as they can be. And I thought that actually seems really appealing. That may be more what I'm interested in, than learning about the community. And I really, I knew fairly quickly after my few months in China that I thought I had been thinking, oh, maybe I'll be a history teacher or do some research. I thought something along those lines. And I came back thinking, no, maybe I want to practice medicine and have that privilege of helping people learn about their bodies and live their healthiest life.
Mm-hmm. I think it's such a cool story and speaks to the power of new experiences like studying abroad and the transformation that people can have by having those kind of experiences.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that really struck me as I was preparing for this interview and looking through your practice, and thinking about it, some of the things that you seem to value as a medical provider, it really seemed very different than many of the other healthcare experiences that I have had. And so I'm wondering if you could just talk about your values and approach to medicine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, well, I'll go back a little bit to say that, connecting from what we were just talking about, when I went into my career in medicine, I always had the idea that part of what was central to taking care of people was the relationship between the provider and the patient. And that was, from that first transformative experience of seeing that when I was in China. So I went in with that in mind. And in medical training, and I went to medical school at UK, and, there were classes that were on patient-centered medicine and bringing, humanism in medicine and really connecting with patients. And I will say, that was just fostered more when I was in medical school, and I was really grateful for that. And then my residency training at Tulane was really patient-centered also, and really helped to encourage this relationship, the provider to encourage the relationship with the patient. But as I went through medical training, medical school and residency, and then once I got into practice, what starts to get in the way of really focusing on your relationship with a patient and them as a human being is the demand of the work, the volume, the number of patients that doctors have to see in a day, whether it's in the hospital or in the clinic. The volume is tremendous. And my first job out of residency was at a hospital-owned practice, and I loved the administrators and the staff and my patients there. But in just a couple of years, I had a few thousand patients. And what happens when one person is taking care of a few thousand people is there is not time or space to create a relationship, to get to know that person as a human being. And what results is medical care that I think is really not as supportive and effective as it could be if the doctor-patient relationship was the foundation of the care. And so that absence was gnawing at me. I would get behind in clinic. Patients would be waiting hours to see me because I was trying to practice in this way where the relationship was central. But then I would hear that I needed to see more patients, and I was trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. And I really don't believe it's any one person's fault. It's just where the system has ended up. And particularly for primary care in a fee-based system, the fees are usually for procedures. And in primary care, we don't do procedures. So the reimbursement is such that, at a high volume practice, you just really have to see a lot of folks to meet overhead. And then what is lost is good patient care. So I feel like I'm getting a little bit away from your question, but to me, the practice of medicine is about, the foundation of it begins with the doctor-patient relationship or provider-patient relationship. And what is different about our practice logistically is that we have many fewer patients. Now I have a few hundred patients, so I can take the time, the emotional and psychological space and energy to really get to know someone, to really hear someone when they're telling me something. And then so much of what we do in primary care should be about educating the patient about their own body, reassuring them when something is not scary. And both of those things take time. And, in a high volume practice, you're so limited in time that you often end up ordering a test or sending someone to a specialist. And it's not because you don't care to create a relationship and educate that patient and reassure them, but you just literally don't have the time.
Yeah, and the other thing I saw is, and I'll just pull a quote here, doctoring is about sickness and wellness, physical and mental health. And to me, that stood out as something that is a bit unique from healthcare experiences that I've had before. So I'm wondering if you could talk about that perspective.
Sure. I'll talk about the sickness and health first, because I think it's really fairly simple and relates to what we were just talking about. in a medical system that is overburdened and providers don't have enough time for patients, we learn to triage. And so we spend the most time taking care of people who are the sickest or with the most urgent needs. But the problem is we're catching things at the end. And if we could, this is something I learned in China that summer. There is an expression in Chinese medicine. I don't think it was an insult, but it would always talk about the Eastern or the traditional practitioner as a gardener who's kind of maintaining the health and wellness of the garden, and a Western practitioner, the way I was trained as a mechanic, just fix the problem. Oh, you've got a leak, we'll just patch it up. And that with a medical system that is overburdened and busy, you end up just being a mechanic. And if what we have time and space to do in our practice with fewer patients is really be a gardener, focus on the wellness and health of a patient, not just wait until there's a fire that needs to be put out and put the hose on it. So that's the sickness and wellness piece. And I think our practice really, it helps people who are sick with lots of different medical issues because we have time to take care of those and be proactive. But it also helps the really well folks who may be in a different style practice, get very little of the provider's time because the provider thinks, you're healthy, there's not much to talk about. And instead we can talk about sleep and nutrition, exercise, mental health. And I think all folks really deserve to have conversations about those things too. And the second piece of that, the mental health and physical health being equally important. I just really know from my own experience and believe from my own experience and working with patients that our mind and body they're connected. And this is, I think we often talk about this and think, oh, that's a spiritual conversation or a kind of not rooted in biology and science, but really, of course, our brain, our mind and who we are, psychologically and emotionally based on our experiences, we hold that all in our brain, and then our brain is connected to all the rest of our bodies. So these things are they're so tightly linked together that we can spend months or years trying to address a physical ailment. And if we're not also thinking about our mental and emotional health, we may not be successful at improving the physical health. And so taking time to address both, gets us to our healthiest self.
So you mentioned in your response exercise and movement, and I know that has been part of your life for a long time, since you were young. And could you talk about just the ways physical activity, movement was integrated into your early life, and then kind of how that transitioned into adulthood?
Sure. I have parents that are athletes, so I think that movement was present from early on, stems from that, their own experience with exercise and what it gave to them. But I remember as a young child being upset about something or having some big emotions to deal with, and my mom would say, "Why don't you just go outside and move?" And that always felt good. I would go climb a tree, or I'd walk around the house, or go down to the creek, and it always worked. And so I think I was trained from an early age to just, I don't know if I understood what was happening or why it felt good, but I knew when I was sad or angry or had some emotions that were hard to hold on to, that moving was going to help me to feel better. So that was really there from the beginning. And then, when I got a little bit older and kind of sports became something that we could be involved in, I think, my folks liked us to have something to keep ourselves busy outside of school. And they thought it was a good way to make friends and socialize. And, as a kid, playing games is fun, or it was fun for me. So that, the movement that I did at home that was a little less structured and organized, like hiking or riding a bike or climbing a tree, was then what was added to that was kind of more formal sports and games. And, a big middle chunk of my life was that, playing all sorts of different sports as a young kid. And then kind of as I got older, narrowing my interests and playing basketball and soccer, through high school, and really enjoying just really the fun that came from it. But also the camaraderie. I always played team sports. So the friendships that came from that too, through kind of the middle portion of my life.
So you found yourself playing soccer in college, and you said that soccer was your real love. What did you love about soccer?
This is actually a really easy question to answer at the moment, because I just watched racing, the Louisville women's team.
Oh, yeah.
I took her up last weekend to a game, and we were with some friends, and I think, lots of folks were just kind of chatting, watching the game, and I was just eyes on the game,
watching the game only.
Yeah, every moment. And I think it's a really beautiful game. Lots of folks think it's too slow and there are not enough goals, but I really love the tactics of it, that you're thinking about this huge space and how to spread people out and use them efficiently. And you can have a really good player, and if they try to do everything themselves, you're not going to win the game. You have to use the whole field and share the ball, and think about how the ball is going to move in space. So I think there really is a beauty aspect of it to me, but also the team aspect of it, and learning to depend on other people, learning to trust other people, learning that you need other people's help to succeed, that you can't do it all yourself. Those kind of positive things. And then I think it also helped, when things aren't going well, when you're losing, when you're not having a good game, it's not all your failure either. You can work through the challenges of not reaching a goal with the support of teammates. So I love that about it too. And then being outside, I just love being outside. So a sport, I think, when it came down to it and I had to choose, was at that point to kind of choose between soccer and basketball. I think my skills at soccer were a bit better. I'm not very tall. And then just being outside always, felt it was so linked to movement for me from an early age, that's part of what I love about the game too.
So not only were you an athlete, but now you've transitioned, through adulthood and stayed physically active through medical training and having children and getting married and all of those life transitions that sometimes set people on different trajectories. So, can you talk about how your activity has changed from competitive athlete to now, and just how you stick with it?
Yes. To be completely honest, by the end of my competitive soccer career, I don't think I had the word for it at the time, but I was really fairly burnt out from, just many hours training, in the off season and then during the season. And I was really ready for a break from the rigidity of a training schedule and preparing for a certain sport. So that has been a major transition to, in my adult years with exercise and movement. I'm not usually setting times or setting a distance. It really is much more about physically how I feel and getting outside and moving and knowing that will feel good, but not saying that I have to go a certain distance or a certain speed. And that has been really wonderful for me. It's like I've taken the pieces of movement and exercise that feel good and held on to them and given myself really like a few decade break from the rigidity that was there with training. And so that has been helpful for me. I certainly have peers who still like the goal setting piece of exercise and setting a goal of running a distance or a pace or a speed on the bike. And for me, and I think it's great that is something that's fulfilling about exercise for some people. But I think I would say I'm often sharing with people my relationship with movement and exercise, because I think sometimes that's intimidating. And for me, it's not about setting a goal. It's not about progressing to the next place with exercise. It's about letting my body do what, as a human being, we're supposed to do, move.
Yeah.
And I think I've become more accepting as I've taken these on these new roles, doctor and mom and wife, and life has gotten busier. I've also become more accepting of what can count as a workout or exercise, and being a college athlete, I was used to practicing 2 hours every day. And so when I first graduated from school, I started training for a marathon because I thought, you need to run for an hour every day at least, like that exercise. And that has just, that's become a lot more fluid and less rigid. A 20-minute walk that's exercise, that's moving, or, stretching, running with my kids as they learn to ride their bikes, that those things are all, that all counts as movement. And I think I've really broadened my perspective on, what exercise is and can be as life has gotten busier.
Yeah, and I think it sounds to me very much like how you approach medicine, right? It's this bigger holistic picture, and sort of you're taking that same kind of approach with your own health, it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned your family. Could you talk a little bit about how you prioritize physical activity for your kids and as a family, and what benefits you think you get from that?
Yes. Luckily, I didn't have to convert my husband to this line of thinking. He also grew up playing sports. His folks were athletes, and he played basketball and golf competitively through college. So we had a really similar mindset about enjoying playing games, playing sports. So that's been easy to do that with our kids in the backyard or the front yard. But I think maybe in a less direct way than my mother did, we also have just shown the kids that Nettie and Chet, my daughter and son, that being outside and moving just feels good. It's part of, I so often in medicine think about things from an evolutionary perspective, like, okay, we are human beings, we're animals, like what were we meant to do in the world? How are we, meant to move? What are we meant to eat? How much are we meant to sleep? And, teaching the kids that, we're animals like our pet dog, like the birds outside in the sky, and we're meant to move around and we're meant to be outside. So because we're kind of teaching them that, we show them that. We go hiking in the gorge a lot. My folks live in the country, so we go hiking on the farm and fishing and swimming in the pond. And what's beautiful about that just being a part of how we spend our time is without so directly telling the kids that's something that they need to do, it becomes something that they want to do. Because they asked to go for a hike, they asked to go for a swim in the pond, because I think similarly to the way I did as a kid, I didn't know that that's something that I needed, but I knew the way I felt after I did those things or while I was doing those things, and it felt good. And I feel so fortunate that really just by exposing our kids to those activities regularly, it seems that they've learned to enjoy them, which then makes them want to do it more.
Yeah, just integrated into their life, right? It's so intentional that it becomes part of who they are and what you all do together rather than this thing you have to do. It's a very different perspective.
It is, and I think it, my hope for all of us, for myself, my children, my patients, is to really learn what we enjoy and pursue those things. And so I think the same is true for movement and exercise. Is just, expose the kids to a lot of different options, and they'll gravitate towards the ones they really enjoy. But anyone who's a parent knows our children respond so much better to kind of mimicking our activities than they do to us telling them what to do and then doing something different. So I think really just kind of showing them how to live a life that movement is a part of is the best way to get them to live that kind of life.
So one of the things that we're hoping as the Active Women's Health Initiative that we can do is really encourage girls and women to be active. So as a woman who has a young daughter and as someone who has been active across your whole life, what are some tips or strategies or advice you could give to girls and women about being active?
I believe that as women in our culture, and girls, I think it starts as a young age. And I think part of it is nature, but a lot of it is nurture. We're inclined to think about the needs of others from an early age. Sisters care for their brothers and the rest of their family. Women care for people in the workplace and in the community, moms, mother, everyone. And I think what's lost is learning how to care for ourselves. And to me, physical activity and movement is really, we should think of it as a gift to ourselves, as something we're doing for ourselves. And the only way we can be content in our help to others is to also take care of ourselves. So I would say, think about movement as an exercise as a gift to yourself. If any type of exercise or movement you're doing does not feel like a gift, you haven't found the right thing. Keep looking.
Yeah.
Because this is not a punishment, and it's not going to work. It's not going to do for your body what it needs to do if you don't enjoy it. So if you have not found movement that you enjoy, keep looking, because it should feel like a gift to yourself. You should feel good after you take time to do it. And then the other piece that I think has been helpful for me, and it's often helpful in conversations with patients, set realistic goals. Because if you set an unrealistic goal and you haven't been very active and you're telling yourself you're going to start being active every day or 5 days a week, you'll do that for a period of time. But at some point that may feel like too much. And then it's really hard to get back to that unrealistic goal again. So just set a goal that you can meet. And once you do that for a while, move once a week if you haven't been moving at all. And once you attain that goal, then set another attainable goal. And I think people have a lot more success in the long term. And our goal is not to move or exercise for the next 6 months. It's to find a way to move our bodies that feels like a gift, so that we will want to do it for the rest of our lives. No rush, just find the thing that you like and then set an attainable goal.
Yeah, I love that advice. And so we've covered a lot of ground over the past 20 or 30 minutes. What are, one or two things you hope our audience takes away today?
I hope that everyone who isn't already thinking about exercise and movement in this kind of broader sense of what it can include, that it doesn't have to be a timed mile or a certain number of laps in the pool. I really hope that I have shared some of that broader perspective about what can be exercise, because it took me many years of my life to really even get to that understanding of exercise for myself. So if I can help somebody else, understand or learn that a little earlier on or at any point in their life, that would feel really good for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like to share today?
I would just like to say thank you for the work that you're doing. I think it's really beautiful and important, and a gift to our community. So thank you.
Well, thank you for supporting us by joining me today, and I appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks, Dee.
Thank you for listening to the Champions of Active Women podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Active Women's Health Initiative and the Sports Medicine Research Institute within the College of Health Sciences at the University of Kentucky. This episode was produced by the Faculty Media Depot. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with your social networks, or simply tell a friend about us. If you want to help us sustain the Champions of Active Women podcast, donate to the Active Women's Health Initiative at uky.networkforgood.com. For up-to-date information about our initiative, follow us on social media at UKAWHI. Thank you for joining us as we empower all girls and women to become athletes for life.